And now I'm honored to introduce our innovators from California State University at Northridge, who will present Flipping Your Classroom with SoftChalk. Jody Constantine Brown is an assistant professor who joined the CSUN faculty in the fall of 2011 after 5 years as the program director of a nonprofit organization that provides free exercise for women with cancer. Dr. Constantine Brown received her MSW from the University of Illinois Chicago and her PhD from Washington University in St. Louis. She completed a postdoctoral research fellowship in mental health economics at the Department of Healthcare Policy, Harvard Medical School, before moving to California in 2001. Her teaching and research interests include mental health services, organizations, program evaluation, capacity for and access to health services, and health outcomes. She's in the process of converting a traditional beginning social work research class into an online course. And thank you, Jody, for presenting today. Wendy Ashley is an assistant professor and has been with California State University Northridge since 2008. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology from Riocon College, her MSW from the University of Southern California, and has been a licensed clinical social worker since 1998. She has over 17 years of social work experience in micro, meso, and macro practice settings. Her research interests include clients and populations that are marginalized, disenfranchised, or without a voice, including but not limited to foster youth, people of color, and people of transgender experience. She's taught in traditional classrooms for over 10 years and has developed a class that she will teach online in the spring of 2012. Thank you, Wendy, for participating today. Lee Wang is an instructional designer in the Faculty Technology Center at California State University Northridge. She is leading the Course Redesign Institute on campus at CSUN and strives for implementing quality principles in online and hybrid courses. She's been working with faculty for 12 years in course design and development. Wendy, Jody, and Lee, welcome, and are you ready to take the stage?
Yes, we are.
Okay. It's all yours.
Well, thank you so much. We are thrilled to have such a large audience today, and we're very excited to share what we have learned about how we learn the SoftChalk and use the SoftChalk to create lessons and flip the classroom, and also prepare for other like online and hybrid courses. But obviously, our focus is flipping the classroom with SoftChalk today, and we have Jody and Wendy and me.
We're super excited to be here. We just want to sort of set the context that one of the reasons we were introduced to SoftChalk and the flipping the classroom model was that our department was moving towards an online program. So this all started with a desire for us to learn how to go from making the material flat and pretty uninteresting to make it a little more exciting and three-dimensional. But a lot has changed as a result of the things that we've learned.
Okay, so this is the outline of our presentation. Well, first, talking about SoftChalk and how we use SoftChalk here on campus, and we'll, address state of problems. After that, Jody and Wendy are going to show sample lessons they have created before and after. Before is PowerPoint files, and then after is the SoftChalk. And some student voices, which means Jody particularly will share what her students like about the SoftChalk lessons compared to PowerPoint presentations. And at the end, we'll wrap up our presentation part with strategies that we have learned, how we collaborate with each other, and in terms of creating the SoftChalk modules where we started, and what we're going to do next. Okay, well, first we're going to talk about SoftChalk. Obviously, Susan has just introduced what SoftChalk is. It's a content authoring tool, and we like about SoftChalk. One thing we like about SoftChalk is it's allowing people to create media-rich content. You can incorporate videos, graphics, and text, and also you can embed a lot of fun activities in SoftChalk lessons. And also it has the mobile-friendly pages right now for the next generation of students and integrated with the LMS. So Jody and Wendy, can you talk more about how did you hear about SoftChalk and why you chose SoftChalk and anything that you have learned about SoftChalk before you reached us at the Faculty Technology Center?
As we were starting to think about creating the online classes, one of our colleagues had suggested looking at SoftChalk or some other interfaces for making the content, as Wendy said, less flat and a little bit more interesting. And frankly, I was nervous and hadn't heard of SoftChalk and didn't know what this meant or what to do. And started looking at it online and thought, okay, well, this isn't as bad as I thought it was, and started playing a little bit. And as I was doing that, realized that for me personally, it helped to have Lee come and sit next to me and make suggestions. The website was there and it was helpful, and I really liked all of the tutorials that SoftChalk offered, but it was nice to have somebody sitting there and talking about, have you considered with your content doing this fun activity or doing this, putting in a crossword puzzle here? And having that back and forth is what really made a difference for me, but I found that I didn't need, not that I don't love Lee, I didn't need a faculty technology person as much as I just needed a colleague to talk about the content of the course and how that would work. SoftChalk actually made it easy.
This is Wendy, and I just want to, again, I'm the slow one of the bunch. I was teaching 10 years ago when people just stood in the front of the room and just talked. So for me, PowerPoint was a big deal. Like, that was a big transition for me, learning how to present all of my lessons in PowerPoint. And I thought that was, the move of the century. But when we were developing the online course, we were told that, what we were putting out there was pretty uninteresting. We really wanted to develop a quality program that reflected how interesting and exciting we are in the classroom. So as Jody was saying, we were presented with several options. And to be honest, SoftChalk was really the only one that we felt like we could actually tackle and had great outcomes.
And it became less about interacting with our students and more about getting the students to interact with the material.
Right.
And that's, I think, one thing that has made us afraid, and I would certainly love to hear from those of you that have taught in a flipped classroom and an online classroom before, how you've managed to create that sense of unity in the classroom. It's easy to do when you're standing there, well, not easy, but it feels easy to do when you're standing there in front of your classroom and you can see faces nodding and smiling at you. I don't know that it feels that easy when you're just looking at a computer screen or when the students are looking at a computer screen. So SoftChalk has allowed me to get the students to interact with the content that I want them to learn rather than interact with me specifically.
So this is Lee again. Thank you so much for your input. I think we just talk about, and it flows naturally to our next slide, which is addressing state of problems. So I have personally, I have conducted a lot of observations in traditional classrooms, and a lot of the problems I've noticed. Number one is lack of too much content to cover, especially in those science areas, disciplines. For example, like nursing. And mathematics, and I've observed those classes, and I realized there's just way too much content to cover. Students have to do multitasking in class. They have to listen, they have to write down their notes, and then they have to review the notes, but not sure how much information is really returned and how well they're prepared before they come to the class, and are they really going to review those notes after the class. So, and often when faculty come approach me and ask me, I need to increase spiffness in my content. I need to learn something new, some new format of delivering my content. So a lot of times they just show me their PowerPoint presentations. And then there's other things. They need to have instructor's presence in the new format of delivery, but without students going out of that lesson modules, for example. Again, more than PowerPoint, I've heard a lot of times instructors saying that I'm a little bit bored with PowerPoint. I want to do something different, something fun, but students are still learning. Mobile-friendly pages, I think the new generation of students, a lot of learning just happens on the go, and so we need to be cognizant of their needs in terms of learning. And also we want to see something that's working well with our learning management system and integrated with LMS so that we can track their performances. So that's how we went with SoftChalk. We're very fortunate because our Chancellor's office is very supportive, and then we have bought, I think the CSU system-wide has this perpetual license, the site license with every campus. So we are able to use that and show it to faculties for our faculty and staff for free to download, and we just direct faculty to go to our website and input their credentials, and they can download it, which is very simple. So what are your kind of problems and issues that you have seen in your traditional classroom, Julie and Wendy?
Well, I'll talk a little bit more about it when it comes to my sample lessons, but I teach a lot of the practice courses, and I teach a little bit of the human behavior as well. And one of the things that happens with those courses is that there's a lot of provocative material, so it's difficult to digest. It's uncomfortable for the students. And so what happens is when I'm covering in the traditional didactic PowerPoint lecture, the students can barely respond to the material in class, and there's not a lot of room for learning. There's not a lot of room for them to digest it and for them to separate their own reactions from the learning piece of it. So and the other piece that I think is super important is that the instructor's presence part. Like, I think one of the difficulties that every campus has is that we're trying to have a level of uniformity in all of the sections of one particular course. And if you have a super dynamic instructor in one class but not in the other one, students are learning differently. What I like about this this type of approach is that the students get to learn at their own pace. They get to kind of calm themselves down as they're learning it, and it doesn't depend on any kind of instructor for them to get the same content or the same material.
And from my perspective, teaching mostly research classes, it's the same kind of thing. The students aren't necessarily being activated by their own history. They're being activated by being just terrified of statistics. And they, as social work students, I'm in social work. I'm not a math student. I didn't come to learn math. And it's all I can do for the first week of class to explain to them that statistics is a language and research is a language, and we're going to learn the language. And I think them having the chance to work through the material on their own gives them a chance to go at their own pace and to not be quite as afraid of the language of research and to see the concepts that they need to see repeatedly. And I'll show you that in the sample lessons a little bit.
Which goes to our next slide.
So we're going to be talking about the before and after of what we've done so far. So the PowerPoint, I'm not good at this. So much for the technology girl. What this is my wrap-up of a full semester's worth of research classes. So this is all material that the students should have seen before. This is the PowerPoint version of. And these are all things as I'm sitting there in front of the classroom talking to them about it. I'm saying, look, we've talked about the purpose of research. We've talked about how to select and narrow from a topic into a research question. We've talked about concepts and variables. Somebody tell me a variable. And inevitably somebody will raise their hand and give me an idea of what the variable is, and somebody else will say, no, 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 I thought that was something different, and we have a discussion. But again, this is at the end of the semester, so this is all something that they should know at this point. This is all material that they should know. This is the chance for them to come together and take all of the material that they've learned over the semester and their own research project. This is the class where our students are asked to do a single subject research design on their own and take what they have done themselves and apply the material that they've learned. So we'll talk about measuring variables, and we'll talk about the study design that they chose to use. With a single subject design, they're all using the same design, but we still talk about the possibility of different designs because they'll be going on to their second research class the following semester. Then we just go through the slides. That was the overview. We talk about the purposes of research. You can explore, describe, explain, or evaluate. Keep in mind as you're looking at this webinar, as you're looking at this particular PowerPoint slide, that what I'm going to do for the SoftChalk piece is take this same material and turn it into the SoftChalk piece. So I'm going to go through this fairly rapidly because this is something that you've seen, my guess is, in any research class that you might have taken however many years ago. Again, selecting topics and research questions. We've talked about how to select a topic, and we talk about the research questions that they should be asking. The information that they're trying to find needs to be relevant, and we do ask them to ask questions that are relevant to social work. A lot of times we'll get students saying things like, what about stress in graduate students? Can I do a topic on, can I do a research project on stress in graduate students? I'm like, you can, but this is a school of social work. Let's talk more about vulnerable populations, shall we? Okay. Narrowing topics into research questions. This is about as fancy as I got for my PowerPoint slides. I'm like, wow, I learned how to use SmartArt. Okay, where I have a research topic and I went down to my personal interest and perhaps what an agency needs. Is it feasible? A lot of times when you're doing a research project or teaching students about research for the first time, they want to answer all of the world's questions in one small study. And I think as educators, we all know that sometimes the smaller questions are the more feasible questions to ask. The literature review, actually coming down right before the research question, has also been a big struggle for our students to try to figure out what that means exactly. And the question that drives me nuts and that I'm hearing constantly is, well, how many sources do I need? Like, well, you need as many as are out there to answer your question. But well, how many is that? Like, okay, so we minimum 10. 10, how am I going to find 10? You'll find 10. And they're always surprised that they find vastly more than 10, and they're not all Wikipedia, which I find extraordinary. But the literature review piece, for me to have this on a slide here, you'll see in the SoftChalk presentation that I was able to put in a link to a chart that I like to use and that I like to show them. I was able to put in a link to an example literature review that they've seen, so it just became that much fuller. Again, defining variables, still in SmartArt here, but I was worried about my colors. Yes, but how we move from measuring to a construct. They're talking about a variable, where you can get data and all of the error that comes along with that. Different types of, did they do a qualitative study, a quantitative study? Again, for this class it was all quantitative, but qualitative is certainly something that we talk about for future classes. And that was the end of the PowerPoint. Now, taking that same information and putting it in SoftChalk, can we run the video? If I do this? Yeah. Okay, so I click on this. I was able to put in a video. What am I clicking on? It's loading, Lee tells me. See, I still do need my technology. This is where students are sitting at their computers at home, and there's me, okay, and there's the video, and will it run?
People won't hear you.
You guys won't be able to hear me. Well, you can hear me now. Hi, everyone. We spent this semester learning about social work research. You cannot hear. So I'm talking about how, oh, nice stop. So I'm talking there to my students about how I'm introducing it. You spent the semester learning about research and completing your own single subject design, and how this lesson is a quick overview of the research process, okay, that highlights the overarching ideas and concepts, and that none of this should be new to you. Okay, so I was able to put in, here we're talking about choosing and narrowing a research question or hypothesis or a topic, talking about concepts and variables again and defining them, okay, measurement, and again design. And the side, no, the side didn't have anything here. Yeah, so students were able to see this in a way that's, again, more creative, a little bit more colorful, and hopefully more interesting for them. Okay, in the purposes of research, they can roll over the headings to find more. Do you remember that first slide where we talked about research is for exploring, describing, explaining, or evaluating? Here, for me, what I had to learn was that I can't just type in the words explore, describe, explain, and evaluate and have it pop up. I got to fill in the boxes too. So it was my words to them, saying describing is to describe situations or events, observe, then describe what is observed. And I can turn around and I can change all of this as well as I get feedback from students that no, they didn't like that or they did like this. For instance, the video that was on the first page, and I'll talk more about this in a little bit, I didn't have this video originally. Students were complaining that they didn't feel like they had a whole lot of interaction with me as the instructor, so we added the video, and hopefully they can get more or feel more connected to me as the instructor. And again, I don't know with the online classes if they're going to need to feel that connection with me or if they're going to feel enough with the material itself. This box over here on the right I like a whole lot. It's the Learn More box, and you can put anything in that box. It's a chance for students to go to find out more information. And that box can be on every single page, or it can be just on whatever page you want it to be. So now we're selecting a topic. I was able to put in rolling over the tabs to find out the information. When you're selecting a topic, it should be important to social work. Remember we talked about students wanting to do stress for graduate students. I'm saying, no, hang on. This is social work. We're not just doing research for the sake of learning. One of the most important aspects is how we do applied research. Of interest to them. I understand that stress in social work students is probably of interest to these master's students, but there's a reason they're becoming social workers, and they should be interested in something beyond their own stress level. So I would like them to choose a topic that is of interest to them and also important to the agency, and answering that so what question. If you ask me, why should you do this, one of my students came to me and says she wants to examine the reason that young men play video games. And my question to her was, well, so what? And she said, well, because that's all my son does. And I said, okay, I appreciate that. You can apply the research that you have learned this semester to try to answer that question for yourself, but I don't know that that's going to become an actual research topic for you for this class. I'm not saying it's not a good topic, but maybe we need to think a little bit more, perhaps a little less personally. Again, this is the Learn More box, and one of the pieces that I always struggled with my students was getting them to involve others in their research. It's crucial, and I think a lot of times students get nervous and say, oh, well, if I don't ask my supervisor what to do, I'll just get it done and nobody will know the difference. Yes, except your supervisor is the one who can say that yes, you can do it, or no, you can't. More resources. This is going back to that literature review that I talked to you about a little bit. Remember the flat page that just said literature review? Well, here you can click on the sections to find out more in terms of using literature or making sure that they start early. But it's this click here, more resources box that I was particularly interested in. It comes down as a document, which you can then open. And it gives them an example of the chart that I would talk to, where you have the article name, you have the date, you have what was examined and the results, and this is how I want them to start thinking about the articles that they have and putting them together in some sort of literature review. And if you scroll down, these came straight from Faulkner and Faulkner, so I'm giving them APA examples as well. And then there's an example literature review on how you would write it, how you would take all of these articles and put it together. And this is something I think students found incredibly important and useful that they weren't able to go back. I'm going to have Lee go back to the main thing. Thank you. That they weren't able to get with the PowerPoint piece. Now, keeping in terms of time, I'm going to run through these last ones relatively quickly, just so I can show you some of the pieces that were there. Okay, so we're talking about concepts, a mental image. They can click and they can roll through. I got to put in these questions, or put in these pictures. That's my son. And have you can put in anything you want. What do you want to know? And so it keeps it personal also, I think, from the perspective of the instructor, which I very, very much liked about SoftChalk. And then there's also the rolling over where you have the pictures. Just all sorts of fun activities and different pieces that you can do. Again, here's that Learn More box where I'm trying to remind them, remember the X's and the O's from the design that they did or that we had talked about in class. Okay, and then I gave them a little bonus page with attachments to the IRB. This is one piece that I really, really like about SoftChalk. After they finish the lesson, they finish going through the lesson, they type in their name and they can email me. It says email score, but they can just email me, the instructor, my email address, and I find out that they've done it. They've at least gotten as far as this page. So that's what I ended up doing, switching from PowerPoint into SoftChalk. I'm going to let Wendy talk about her shift over, and then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about student reactions, because I did talk to my students in a traditional classroom using this particular example. So, Wendy?
Awesome. Bear with me. Okay, so this is, like I said a little bit ago, I teach in the practice and the human behavior courses, and this is a trauma course, which is in the human behavior and social environment category. So the whole point of the course is to teach students about what trauma is and how it looks with vulnerable populations. So as you'll see from this pretty basic PowerPoint, although I do have a fancy schmancy brain in here, this is where students move from sort of generally identifying various traumas to really paying attention to how intrapersonally or intrapsychically how trauma impacts, disrupts or delays development. So you can see this is me doing a super fabulous graphic. Again, I'm trying at this point to be creative with how the material is displayed. A little bit about neglect, a little bit about, this is a really important slide. One of the things that we teach students, which I think is a pretty relatively new concept for a lot of them, is that neglect is just as big or even a bigger deal than abuse. And one of the things that students walk in thinking is that, so what, someone doesn't feed you, so what if you don't get attention? Like, it's much worse to get physically or sexually abused. And I think we start to introduce the concept to them that neglect really impacts people on a day-to-day basis. And so this is a whole new concept. But if you look at the way that this is laid out, it's pretty boring, and I don't know that it conveys the significance of the material. A little more about, again, I just tried to use some colors to make it fabulous. Adaptation. And I have to tell you that when I'm doing this lecture, I get tired in the middle because it's so much material, and I'm explaining and I'm explaining and I'm explaining, and it always concerns me that it takes me to explain the material, and that they're not really able to take what they learn out of the reading and apply it to anything. So I'm constantly giving examples and trying to make it make sense. A little bit about trauma memories. Again, me trying to make a beautiful, colorful, smart art graphic, just about how trauma impacts the body. Again, this is a little bit more on how trauma impacts people. Impact on children, impact on internal experience. Pay attention, of course, to this piece right here, where it talks about the stress in children's bodies, because this is very flat and doesn't really add, it doesn't add anything to how, it doesn't add any kind of picture to how children remember stress through their feelings, or how smells activate them, or how sensations. And you read this about a dog, but it doesn't really do anything for you unless you add a little extra something to the conversation. So it's pretty flat. Again, here's a little bit on the mind-body connection. Again, very, very sort of flat and not very, doesn't have too many dimensions. I'm not going to go over all of it because it's pretty boring. Although I have to tell you, when I'm doing it, it's quite dynamic. So here's my SoftChalk lesson, and again, I got to put this fun little smart art graph. This little graphic in there, which I think is a fun picture. What I did, as you can see, is I put, this is the original slide with a little bit of flavor added to it. And what I like about this is that you don't have to really start at the very beginning and reinvent the wheel. You can import your slides exactly as they are if you want to. So I didn't think that this needed to be different, so I left it and I just wrote what the module was addressing, because I didn't have the need to sort of redo the whole thing. There was nothing more I needed to say about that. So I am still very content heavy. That's what I do. And you can't, you can take, what is it, the horse out of the something? No, you can take something out of something, but not something out of something. Anyway, that's who I am. So I'm going to be wordy. You're going to see that in mine. Whereas Jody's have a lot more sort of visual interest differently, because we're different people. So this is the nice part about it, is that we get to, our own personalities and how we see things get to come out. But remember, in the previous slides, the prevalence of trauma was just a bunch of words, and just like Jody's, if you click on this, it tells you what the prevalence looks like. So you can look at how men versus women, how they have trauma. How often does trauma turn into psychopathology? And what does it look like for kids? So I think the visual piece really satisfies those that are much more visual learners versus just the auditory perspective you might get in a traditional classroom. Again, here's the pretty flat part about the how neglect impacts them. But what I thought was a nice addition was this piece that I could add, the fight or flight response piece. So over here we're talking about fight or flight, which again is pretty flat. But now we can see what it does inside someone's body and in their brain, and then we can see where all of those pieces are located in a nice sort of visual representation. And then you can add this sort of crazy noticeable versus hidden effects so that it adds a different level of complexity as well. Not only is it impacting you in all these ways, not only is it impacting you and your entire body, but some you can see and some you can't, so that when they think about translating that to client work, they can think about some of it they'll be a little bit more observable and tangible, and some will not. Here's a self-check. So I gave them a lot of material, and one of the things that's pretty consistent in this lecture, as in many of the lectures, is that the material is repeated in different ways. So as opposed to just reiterating the same information over and over again, I'm giving them a little bit of a check, and that they can sort of mark the correct answers, and at the end it'll tell them whether it's right or not. And this is one of my favorite activities, is the crossword puzzle, because after I've given them all this information, they get to, figure out. They get to look at the clues and figure out, whatever they think it is. And at the end, it'll tell them what the answers are, which is kind of cool. So even if they didn't know it as I just typed in anything, it will still tell you, but it's good for them to kind of play with it around a little bit and see what they come up with. And what we really want the students to do is, instead of just sort of having a bunch of verbiage or terms that mean nothing, or jargon, because no one likes a social worker that's all jargony, they really are able to utilize the language to actually have it mean something. And if they have to explain it to clients, it'll be a little bit more authentic than them just using random words. And remember the part about the dog a little bit ago? Again, this makes a lot more impact. Lee doesn't like this picture, but I loved it, because this really, when we talk about a child bitten by a dog at 9 months of age, that means less than if you see this and this. That really gives a whole different perspective than just the words. Don't you think, Lee? Mm-hmm. She still doesn't like it. Again, here's me importing another one of my slides, because I like this one. Again, more slides. And do I have anything else for you? Let me see. I like this one. So this is similar to Josie's. Of course, I like using pictures of celebrities. But this is again, when the words are just flat, talking about someone with a beard, activating someone who had a contact with an abuser who had a beard, means less than if you see someone physically with a beard. That might help you remember the information a little bit better. This is, again, about people getting stuck in survival mode. About the brain signals, again, repeating the sort of fight or flight, sympathetic, parasympathetic piece. And then this is about the survival instincts, like how we respond when we get overwhelmed or traumatized. And here's a whole quiz, which I will not spend all my time going over. And then here is, what you can do is you can build in, again, ways for people to then sort of go over the material again in a little bit more of a creative way. And this is one of those check boxes that you can just click to view the answer. And that's it for me. But let me just add the piece that I said earlier about two things. One is that I am someone that talks relatively quickly. Hopefully you all are following me. And what I find is that in a PowerPoint lesson like the one I just showed you, I talk and I'm trying to get through it, and sometimes I talk too fast. So what I like about this kind of approach is that versus the pace being left to me, the students can drive their own pace. And I think also because the material does activate the students as well, they are able to make it a little fun and slow it down and give them room to respond without reacting, being interactive and experiential versus emotionally reacting to the material.
And this is Jody again. One of the things that you saw both me and Wendy doing was working through and clicking through, and that's what the students are doing. We're working through the lesson the same way that the students would be working through the lesson, and that was going down to student voices. One of the things that my students talked about, like I said, I had this in a traditional classroom where I had them doing the SoftChalk presentation, not presentation, but them doing the SoftChalk piece themselves, and some of their contents were they're playing, they liked SoftChalk, they liked how interactive it was, that it looked nice, that it was fun. They were all very, very clear that having that at home would be something that they would actually open up on the computer and look at, rather than just the PowerPoint where it was relatively flat, where they weren't feeling like they were doing anything more than just reading the book. I think they liked the clicking, the crossword puzzles, the even the pieces where you're just clicking on the little circle to say, highlight this, highlight that, or highlight the other. I think students feel like they're involved and engaged in the learning process rather than just sitting and listening, despite how fantastic Wendy and I are. We are really great presenters, but this gives them a chance to interact with the material. It all goes back to interacting with the content.
Absolutely.
Talking about how we like about using SoftChalk from the instructional designer's perspective is that the information is presented differently. So instead of the linear, display of within PowerPoint, actually here you're arranging your information that you're going to deliver differently, horizontally and vertically, and then also you can bring a lot of like rich media into this. Students can see, students can hear, and the students have a lot of control, the pacing of the content. And also back to the information, how that is delivered here, you can actually push some of the content backwards a little bit, so you don't present a lot of the overwhelming information up front. Students have the control to see how much they want to see at one click. And then the other thing is about the chunking. I think SoftChalk it really gives people the idea about how you should chunk your the whole course or modules, or how you rearrange your content differently.
That was one thing that Lee was very, very helpful with me, at least I suspect with Wendy as well. We both designed this as one class was, the entire module was one class, but there's no reason that I couldn't take and do a SoftChalk presentation or SoftChalk piece just on selecting a research topic.
Yeah. And
keep that separate. And all of this is posted on Moodle, Blackboard, our way is Moodle, but it was the chunking, and I think Lee is mentioning that, and I think that's thinking about your material differently and thinking about it in terms of small pieces, and it's going into a classroom and saying, here's my whole lecture for the 2.5 hours that I'm here, versus, okay, for this 15 minutes, we're going to spend time learning this piece, whatever that may be.
Well, I always hate when students ask me, like, can I have your PowerPoint? Because I feel like it sort of circumvents the process of them reading. Like, why not just read the material? This came from the material. Why do you need that? But what I think this does is it adds another level in between. So the students read the material, they have this opportunity to interact with the material, and then they come back to us and we can exchange, we can have a dialogue with them. We can have an interactive, and even in the traditional classrooms, we can have a conversation with them that is really about application and integration of the material versus actually just having to teach them all of it from the foundation up.
Yeah, so that's how we define our flipped, classroom model here. We actually take the lecture out of the face-to-face, classrooms, and then we leave the time in the classroom more for discussion and other activities. So we just talked briefly about strategies of how we start using SoftChalk. Again, we recommend that people think about your content first, what kind of content you are going to bring into SoftChalk, and think about what activities. It's not just using any activity to make a different presentation, but think about how that specific activity would help students get the content that you are hoping them to master. And then also think about the teaching moment. If the too much content and the words, and how you can change that teaching moment to a learning activity. So that's what you can think about. And start something small. You don't have to think about switching all your PowerPoint presentations to SoftChalk right away. Start something small. For example, like Jody started with the WrapUp module. She just wanted to try to see if her students like it or not. And then, again, we highly recommend that you collaborate with your peers and then find any resources on campus. For example, our campus, we have Faculty Technology Center. We have instructional designers, instructional technologists here at the staffing, and then so we can help faculty. So it's really nice to be in such kind of a collaborative effort.
Yeah, I think that the piece about shifting from a teaching moment to a learning activity is one of the hardest ones, at least for me, because I have mastered the teaching moment, but to give it back to the students has been pretty freeing, I think, for me, and also difficult.
So that's pretty much what we have to share with you at our presentation today. And so
we're happy to take questions.
Yes.
Okay, we have a lot of questions out there. One question that's been asked a number of times is, how long did it take you to basically take your class from the PowerPoints to the interactive SoftChalk lessons for use at home?
You know, I think it's a learning curve. Like the first, I've only done about 1.5. I mean, I have not done my entire class. But when I first started, this is Wendy, by the way. It took me a little bit longer than it normally would have, I would guess, because I was still learning. But the second time I put it together, it went much more quickly. I don't know, what would you say, Jody?
Yeah, this is Jody. It took me, I would say, total complete. It takes about 12 hours to transfer one PowerPoint lecture into SoftChalk. And that's not because SoftChalk is difficult to use. That's because that requires all the thinking time and all of the, oh gosh, I have this slide. How would this fit together with that slide? And what activity do I want to use? And should this be a hotspot activity or should this be a crossword? Oh, shoot, I did a crossword last lesson, so I really shouldn't do another crossword this soon.
Right.
So it's a lot of that thinking piece that takes time. The physical transferring of it, 2-3 hours.
Yeah,
honestly, it's the thinking and the planning piece that I find takes, for me, a good full day to stop and think about how you want to rethink your class.
Yeah, I would agree.
So we really, this is Lee, sorry again. So as an instruction designer, I would highly recommend that faculty, they develop their storyboard, before they use any technology. So think about your content and you want to bring it over to SoftChalk, and for one specific slide, how are you going to kind of like present your information, and what kind of activities you want to include for students to really explore a little bit. And then you go to SoftChalk and to see what are the available tools or features or activities there that can really enhance that, what you plan to do. So again, planning is a little bit, takes more time than really just getting into SoftChalk and developing lessons.
I also think it's helpful if you are not as creative at the in the front end, to think about, if you've taught the class before, where have you gotten stuck? Where have the students not been able to absorb the material? Because those are areas to start with, especially if you're starting small, to transfer that information first.
Another question that's been asked frequently is accessibility issues. They've noticed a lot of Flash-related activities in your lessons and how you make those accessible using SoftChalk and and also available for the iPad.
This is Jody. I'm going to let Lee answer that. She's my technology person.
Oh, I think SoftChalk does a pretty good job of, providing the mobile users access to these lesson, modules, right? And then about the other like Flash activities, I believe those. Are you talking about the videos or something else like activities?
The Flash activities that were the specific question, I think, as well as just general content.
Okay. Well, I think, again, I think the SoftChalk does a very good job of, addressing compliance. So when, people create SoftChalk lessons, there are a lot of places that they need to be, accommodating. For example, like descriptions and alt tags and short descriptions, and also using video, we encourage, but that's outside of SoftChalk, though. I think for any types of technology, we incorporate, universal design principles. So it's not just, SoftChalk.
Okay. Another question that we've had is, how do you know that your students are completing their assignments before they come to the class? How do you get them to do that? How do you ensure they're doing that?
For me, it was partly that email before that I showed you on my SoftChalk piece at the end, that they send me, that I received an email saying that they had at least opened up the presentation and glanced through it. I don't know that they're actually doing all the parts. I know for the quizzes and some of the other activities that there's the same type of thing. You need to, you can set it up as the instructor so that you get an email when students have completed something. The other piece is, just like a traditional classroom, there are always going to be those students that are sitting in the back and not saying a word. And you know who they are. They don't think you know who they are necessarily, but as instructors, we know who they are, and you do the best you can with what you have to make sure they reach it. But the discussions have been lively enough and integrated enough, and I think the students find it really helpful to, they know if they haven't done the prep work by going through the presentation ahead of time, going through the lecture ahead of time separately and apart, then they're not going to benefit from the classroom time, from that interactive time. And there's an awful lot of peer pressure, and in this case I think it's good peer pressure, where if they're not responding, then if they're not offering, if they're not bringing anything to the table, then their peers aren't going to be offering or handing anything back to them. And for us, at least for the research class that I'm teaching, there's an awful lot of back and forth and give and take, and this is my question, what did you think about that, what did you consider? And I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any way of ensuring that they're doing it all. I don't think that, like, just like there's no way of ensuring that people are going to read in your, in your classroom. But you can tell, like Dodie was saying, you can tell who comes to the table prepared. And those people who are still sort of wanting to understand the general concept or not even able to, basic stuff, that's going to be a good indicator.
Okay. How have you had to address any kind of copyright issues with respect to content that you've published in your lessons?
We are still learning all of that. I mean, it is there. We've been told that there's a lot of information that we can't use. Like in a traditional class, there are certain movies that we use that we're not able to use. I don't know, Lee, do you want to speak to that? Because I know that I've only used things that are either available on the internet or I cite things, but do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this is definitely not something, particularly with the SoftChalk, that it's outside the SoftChalk, that this is some kind of important issues for a lot of people. That so when we work with faculty and we ask them that how would you find that, how did you find that image, or how did you find that video, or something like that, and the content, and make sure that you model this kind of copyright to your students. And then also when you go and search media from the internet, what kind of license do they have? A Creative Commons license? Can you take in and modify it, or you cannot share with others? All these kind of information that we're sharing with faculty to make sure that they do follow the copyright.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question here asking, could you give a brief description of the timeline of your flipped classroom model?
I don't know that I understand the question. The timeline for how long?
Is it currently underway? Are you
currently underway? I've certainly been practicing last semester, but officially the online courses go live this coming fall, so 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
Well, the whole campus of, moving on to the flipped classroom model is, that has been fairly new here at the Northridge. But lately there are a lot of, more and more of people showing the strong interest in using SoftChalk and the lecture capture.
Well, I think a piece of this, I mean, I don't know that it speaks directly to the timeline, because there's a difference between the timeline that we had to get to our online courses and then the timeline to start to utilize the new lectures in class. And I think one of the things that we're learning is that this isn't something that's going to be limited to just our online program. We can do these same lectures, we can use the same material in our traditional classrooms and flip those, which is an option that I don't think we knew was available before this.
Mm-hmm.
That we're all really excited about now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you plan to do some kind of an assessment with each of the lecture sessions in SoftChalk to understand what the students are getting, what's getting across to them, or what you might need to spend more time on in class?
I love that. I mean, I don't know that I have, this is Wendy, I don't know that I have any formal assessment tools, although I would like to have some. That's a great idea. I know for me, I've taught this trauma class that I flipped. I've taught it about 6 times, so it will be nice for me to see the difference in how the students are able to integrate or even learn the material in a way that they haven't thus far. I mean, there's been some pretty specific areas that I feel like have been somewhat limited over the last few years that I am hoping will have a different outcome. I don't know.
I was going to say one thing we did do, we had one online class last semester that was taught by one of our faculty, and he did an official assessment. He compared his class, and he had all of the students in his online class to fill out the survey, and he had this there were 3 sections that were taught traditional classroom, and he had the students in those classrooms fill out the same survey, and he did a comparison and found that there was no difference in the level of learning, at least according to the students, between his online class or the SoftChalk class, the flipped classroom, as there were in the traditional classes. So I could see doing something like that. Certainly that's an option for us. And then for me personally, I was just going to ask my students. I mean, I know I'm the researcher and talking about all that sort of thing, but my whole intention was to send out the occasional email, or when I catch them online or if we're on Skype or something along those lines, say what's working for you, what's not working for you, what do you understand, what do you not understand, what can I do to make this better, easier to understand, whatever it is to meet your needs.
Well, and since Jody is the researcher, perhaps we can persuade her to develop some type of evaluation tool. Because I think the beauty of what we have to offer is that we are also teaching a traditional classroom at the same time. So we could measure what it looks like for the flipped classes versus the traditional.
We could. That's a great idea. Thank you.
And we appreciate that.
Okay, we're almost on the hour, and so just wanted to thank Jody and Wendy and Lee for the presentation today. Thank you all so much. There are still a lot of questions. We'll be sharing the questions that we didn't get to with Jody and Wendy and Lee to see if they can have some time to answer questions directly, and any SoftChalk related questions that were asked, we'll try to get back with you. If you're interested in learning more about SoftChalk, we have introductory webinars available on our website. Also, the Innovators in Online Learning series, we do record those, and I think as we've mentioned, this webinar will be recorded. You'll have access to a link to this as well as the slides in 24 hours after the webinar. You can request private customized demonstrations for your institution if you're interested in finding out how SoftChalk can be used to help your specific needs. There is a 30-day free subscription trial to SoftChalk Cloud, or a 30-day free download for our desktop SoftChalk 7 product. We also have a number of video tutorials and short courses you can sign up for. You can explore our website, sign up for our newsletter, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. For more information, again, if you have questions that you want to address to Wendy and Jody and Lee, you can contact them at ftc@csun.edu. And with SoftChalk, if you're interested about pricing, sales@softchalk.com, or you can, for general questions, you can contact Steve at softchalk.com. He is the organizer for our Innovators in Online Learning series, and he'd be happy to answer any questions that you have too. But again, thank you to Wendy and Jody and Lee. We really appreciate it. You're taking your time today and putting this presentation together. And thanks to all of you for attending today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. And